Arseniy Yatsenyuk is a former prime minister of Ukraine and joins me now from the Munich Security Conference. Arseniy Yatsenyuk, you heard the news, just like everybody else, that U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio was planning to meet the Russian foreign minister to discuss an end to the war in Ukraine, with no clear mention of whether Kyiv would have a seat at the table. What ran through your mind?
Well, look, how can you guys negotiate the future of Ukraine without Ukrainians? And the same goes with the European Union, and the same actually goes with the entire architecture of the NATO and the free world. So I do believe that this has to stop as quick as possible. It's a kind of inconsistent policy. We strongly believe that our American friends and allies will come to senses. And we will be together in our righteous fight against the autocrats and dictators.
Do you see any viable potential for a breakthrough, or do you fear a compromise at Ukraine's expense? I have a feeling I know the answer to that question.
Correct. Look, what I see an inconsistency, and I don't see any kind of clear-cut, very viable and strong plan. There is no plan that has been hammered out by Americans, Europeans, and Ukrainians. So the thing is that we need to have a very strong menu and to do everything possible in order to bring this peace. And I admire this motto, peace through strength. But could we elaborate on the definition what strength means? So we have to ramp up sanctions. We need to increase the pressure on Russia. We are not allowed to sow the division among NATO member states and among allies. Because Putin right now, he is reaping the benefits of this kind of its inconsistent and chaotic policy.
Many have argued, and certainly people right there at the conference you've been attending the past couple days, that the U.S. indeed has been a good friend to Ukraine now for many decades. Is it not possible for Ukraine's security interests to be adequately represented in a U.S.-Russia dialogue? Or does Kyiv risk being sidelined completely?
Well, let's define the targets and the aims of war criminal Vladimir Putin. He wants to take over an entire Ukraine. He wants to disrupt the European Union. And he wants actually, together with his autocratic friends, to humiliate the United States and to depose the United States as the leader of the free world. So I strongly believe that the president of the United States, newly elected president, he doesn't want to have a new European Afghanistan on his watch. But it smells bad right now. You know, the optics is very bad. So I kindly request and I urge our American friends to be on board. So the more united we are, the stronger we are, the better chances for everyone to prosper and to lead this free world. Because it's up to the United States to decide whether they will remain as a beacon of the free world. Because it's so correlated. If Ukraine fails, the US would be the next one. It would cause a domino effect. And autocracy is to prevail. It's as clear as possible.
Well,
so, once again,
let me ask you this then.
Go ahead.
President Zelenskyy said yesterday, made it very clear he would not recognize any deal made behind the backs of Ukraine. But what does he risk in very real terms if he doesn't accept a deal brokered by Ukraine's largest supplier of aid?
Well, there is no chance to have a fair and just deal over the Ukraine's future without Ukraine, period. So if the Americans want to lead the world, and we strongly believe that they want to make this, as they were always the leader of the free world. So they have to do their best in order to save Ukraine. And in order to save Ukraine, everyone to sit at the table. I mean, this is the biggest war after the Second World War on the European continent. So it's obvious that Europeans have to be completely engaged. I mean, an entire European Union, including the United Kingdom. And the Americans, they signed a Budapest Memorandum. in the early 90s. Let me remind you that under the Budapest Memorandum, Ukraine relinquished the biggest nuclear arsenal in Europe. And we got guarantees from our American friends that Russia will never invade Ukraine. But something went wrong. And I do believe that our American friends, they have both political and legal responsibility over Ukraine's future. So once again, we would never we would never accept any kind of deal that has been made behind our backs.
Understood. Heard loud and clear. That is Arseniy Yatsenyuk. Many, many thanks, sir.
I'm joined now by DW's Teri Schultz, who is in Munich on this last day of the security conference. Teri, good to see you. So what can we expect from this emergency summit that's been called by European leaders? Can Europe do anything to avoid being sidelined in discussions on Ukraine's future?
We're not sure yet, Mariana, to be honest, and neither are those leaders themselves, because Keith Kellogg, the U.S. envoy for Ukraine, has been asked directly whether Europe will have a seat at the table, and he says no. It may be uncomfortable for you to hear that, but that's the way it is right now. Now, we also have sources telling us that behind the scenes, he's less black and white about that, because let's not forget that they are expecting Europe to uphold any potential ceasefire that they come to. So you can't really come and impose that requirement on Europeans without having their input as to what's possible. That's the big concern. That's the leverage they have. But at the moment, they can meet in Paris, and the UK will be there with them. So it's truly the European pillar of NATO, but that's a long way from Saudi Arabia, where these talks are being held. And I'm sure that a lot of European allies are not very comfortable with this very rapid warming of ties between the U.S. and Russia, the meeting between Rubio and Lavrov that you just mentioned, and the statement that was put out yesterday, which I read surprisingly with the talk of removing barriers, which are probably read as sanctions. So there's a lot that's happening at the moment, and the problem is nobody in Europe really knows where the U.S. is going to come down on this.
And Teri, there was also quite a lot of shock in response to the speech by the U.S. Vice President Vance, especially here in Europe. What does this tell us about the state of transatlantic relations under the new Trump administration?
I think that this coming after the appearance of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth at NATO, where also a lot of America First statements were made, this was sort of another shock in that way. Like, even if they knew it was coming, it felt differently to be sitting in this room and having these things said to them, the different examples of where the United States says that free speech is being, set back in Europe, that individual freedoms are being curtailed here, when Europe, of course, feels like some of that is actually happening in the United States at the moment. It was a very sobering moment. It wasn't the kind of speech that you generally have at the Munich Security Conference coming from the U.S., the days of John McCain, and, very transatlantic-oriented U.S. officials. But again, the Europeans have known that this might be coming under the Trump administration, so it was more of a confirmation of their fears than, a surprise coming out of nowhere. And it will probably serve to get them really working on the progress that they need to make together to be stronger.
That was DW's Teri Schultz reporting from the Munich Security Conference. Teri, thank you as always.